JRPGs are well known for their captivating narratives, immersive worlds, and strategic combat. I think the two predominant combat systems that you see quite often in JRPGs are action-based and turn-based. So today I definitely wanted to explore more about the two and which one is better. Hello everyone, my name is Fedro and this is cozyfeji, and on this channel we cover a variety of things such as video essays, reviews, JRPGs, and all things cozy gaming. Now it goes without saying that the two predominant combat systems that you find in JRPGs are turn-based and action. But for the past, not even the past few years, for as long as JRPGs have been around, there's been a debate on which one is the supreme, which one is better, action versus turn-based. We're gonna finally squash the debate and figure out which one is better. Not really, I just wanted to put my 2 cents on the debate because I find it very interesting. As someone who has played both action and turn-based in JRPGs, I don't really know if I have a particular stance on them, but it's always interesting to see whether people sit on them, because I know a lot of people say that action is a lot more better and that turn-based is a lot more old and outdated. Some definitely do see that turn-based is a lot more methodic and thought-provoking in a sense. And you can definitely see that shift, especially with developers nowadays who used to start off with turn-based at the very beginning, and now they're kind of leaning more into action combat. So let's go into it. We're gonna go dive into the definition of what turn-based and action-based are, what the pros and cons, and ultimately, which would you prefer? So action-based combat in JRPGs emphasize real-time engagement, requiring players to make split-second decisions and execute precise actions. A few examples of JRPGs that utilize the action-based combat would definitely be like the Tales of series, Kingdom Hearts, and I think definitely the East series from Neon Falcom. I think those are JRPGs that utilize the action combat. And especially with Tales of, I noticed that each system each game they always revitalize or add something new to the action combat system, which I find really interesting. So each game essentially is the same baseline of action combat, but there's always another layer to it. So of course there's going to be advantages when it comes to action-based combat, one of them being real-time engagement and immersion. I feel like when it comes to action combat, you yourself as a player are fully immersed in it, that each action that you're making is the player is making. So whenever you press the A for attack, that A is actually inputting that attack button right away in real time. So you're always constantly on your toes and on your feet when making actions or going into combat or battle when in the game. There's a lot more skill-based action, skill-based execution when it comes to action-based combat, especially when it comes to like games with souls-like games or soulsborne games, in that sense that you really have to be meticulous and really thought out what you're doing. You can't just be button mashing your way to games. You really had to be thought out of like, okay, I need to block here, or I need to parry or dodge the situation. Maybe I should lean back and wait for the enemy to come at me, or really focus on the enemy patterns when playing an action-based combat. But for me, when it comes to action-based combat, I tend to like, I'm gonna be so real with you guys. I'm not like the best gamer. I don't pride myself to be a really, really good gamer. I probably am pretty trash. So when it comes to a lot of action-based combat, I kind of just like free willy kind of button mash my way through. I don't really put a lot of thought in it, and that's just me. And that's me, as a skill issue on my part. I'm aware. I'm trying to get better at that and really take into consideration the combat and every mechanic that's going in within the action-based combat. Also for me, when it comes to my gameplay and my experience, I definitely focus more on narrative and storytelling aspects and plot. So I just honestly kind of swing by, especially when it comes to action combat. I find it easier to kind of tune myself off when it comes to action games combat, but that's just me. And with that being said, let's lead on to some disadvantages when it comes to action-based combat. I definitely do think that certain games, again, like I mentioned before, especially specifically with Souls-like games, there's definitely a high learning curve. You really, really have to pay attention to what you're doing when it comes to those games. You can't, again, button mash your way through the game and just hope for the best. You really have to really pay attention to certain cues. You have to pay attention, again, to the boss and what they're their fighting style and their patterns are, to really make sure that you could obviously tackle and beat the game, but also make sure you don't die in every 5 seconds. Also, this requires a lot of reflexes and coordination, which I'm not gonna lie, I kind of lack. So when it comes to action-based combat, you really have to really be on top of it and really pay attention to all of your surroundings around you, and to make sure that you're paying attention to, again, to mention before, a lot of cues from whether it's the environment or the boss itself. Also, like I mentioned before, with action-based combat, you may lack, or there might be a little less strategic depth to it. Again, there are some games where you could really just kind of plow your way through without really having much thought into the process. Like I mentioned before, sometimes I just kind of tune myself out and button mash my way into the game. But that's not to say that turn-based combat doesn't have that as well. But a lot of the time I can just hack away and then just go about my business, especially as someone who really does prioritize storytelling in games. I kind of find myself doing that quite more often than not. Now let's talk about turn-based combat systems. Turn-based combat in JRPGs adopts more of a methodical approach, dividing gameplay into distinctive turns where players select actions for their characters from a menu. A pretty common joke in the JRPG community, where turn-based game is more picking and exploring the menu than actual playing the game itself, which I find very funny because that sometimes is the case for a lot of them. But when I think of turn-based RPGs or JRPGs that really are known for turn-based combat, I definitely have to think of Dragon Quest or the old school Final Fantasy games. Of course, you have the strategic side of things such as Fire Emblem or Disgaea. Those are definitely JRPGs that utilize a turn-based combat and really grow upon it. I think another example would be Persona, which I think has a really fun and interesting take with the turn-based combat. It's a lot more flashy, a little bit more intuitive, and a lot more engaging than most older turn-based combat, kind of like, for example, Dragon Quest, which is pretty run-of-the-mill. You look at a menu, click whether or not I want to attack or heal or debuff my party and whatnot. So what are some advantages when it comes to turn-based combat? Number one, when I think of turn-based combat and one of its advantages, it definitely has to be the strategy and strategic planning when it comes to executing your fights and battles. You really had to think about every decision that you're making, whether that be the placement of your party members, who you want to bring into the battle, what weapons that you want to use. Not saying that this isn't a thing that you think of in action RPGs, but especially in turn-based combat, those are things that you really had to really think about. I really do think it's really rewarding when you take the time to really think about which characters you want to bring in, which equipment you want to put onto them, what placement, especially the placement of these enemies. I think it's really, really important when it comes to turn-based RPGs. And you definitely especially feel this, and especially in strategic tactical RPGs, which is kind of a subgenre in itself of turn-based RPGs, where placement and strategy is definitely very important and highlighted in those. And I also do think that turn-based RPGs are a little bit more accessible than action RPGs. I know a lot of people may say the other way around, but I feel like with turn-based RPGs, it allows the player to have more grace and a little more room for error when it comes to action RPGs. Because if you put in the wrong input or press the wrong button, you kind of screw yourself over completely and you might end up being dead. But I feel like with turn-based RPGs, you really get to take your time in executing your plan and how you want to go about tackling this battle. So if you really are lost or confused or just kind of like, I don't know how to go about this, you could always do trial and error and really figure it out. And okay, maybe I'll place my enemies here or place my enemies there. And also with turn-based RPGs, it really encourages the player to be a lot more critical and analytical with their decisions on how they're going about the battle. I think it's so important, and it's very emphasized in turn-based RPGs, that honestly, every move matters. Every move counts, and like I mentioned before, whether you want to take this turn to all of your party members to be full force and aggressive and attack the boss, or whether you not want to take the time to maybe step back and notice that your party is kind of down in the dumps, maybe we need to heal them up, or maybe you want to put a debuff or on your party to make sure that they're kind of already and good to go, or you want to put a guard up on certain members to make sure that they prepare for a huge attack from the enemy. There's always so many like thoughts and processes that goes into when it comes to turn-based combat. Now I just want to talk about some overall comparisons. I definitely do think that with action combat or action-based combat, I feel like it's a little bit more immersive in a sense that if I want my character to do this right now, they will do this right now. With turn-based combat, when you're looking through menus to pick actions for your character, it kind of does break that immersion just a little bit. Not that it's detrimental to the game and it loses your like the tension of the game, but I feel like when it comes to action-based combat, it definitely is a little bit more immersive on that part. And also the pacing of them. Pacing is something to look at when it comes to both action and turn-based combat. With action-based combat, it's pretty fast-paced. You're pretty much kind of going off the cuff, you're like really going at it. With turn-based combat, you really have to take your time. It's a little bit more slower pace. And again, it's all about preference at the end of the day. If you're someone who wants something fast-paced, really sharp and punchy, maybe action-based combat is something that you're more lean towards too. If you want to take your time, want something more chill and cozy, then turn-based combat is definitely up your alley because it's definitely take your time, go at your own pace kind of game. But over the past few years, when it comes to player reception and whether they now prefer action or turn-based, I think we're definitely in a time and era where I think more developers and also more players are leaning more towards action combat. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a horrible thing that turn-based combat is dead. I definitely do think that there's a time and place for both. And I definitely notice in a lot of games recently with the new Trails through Daybreak, where it has both action and turn-based combat mixed within it. And you also have that in the new upcoming Metaphor Refantasia, where it also incorporates both action and turn-based into it. So it's really cool to see JRPG developers trying to experiment with different types of forms of combat, whether they stick to just a standard turn-based but add some interesting elements to enhance the turn-based combat, or action where they add a little bit more strategic, or with the two games that I mentioned before where they incorporate both into a more harmonious relationship when it comes to the combat. Either way, I think both of them both have their own merits and both have their pros and cons to them. Again, it just comes down to player preference and what you're in the mood for. Now, as for me and where I stand on, again, for me, it really just comes down from what I'm in the mood for. If I'm in for the mood to really just sit down, take my time, and really think about what I'm playing and just to really engage into it, I kind of would prefer turn-based combat in that instance, just because I really get to just kind of sit back, kind of chill, cozy, get a drink or a snack, and just play my time with a turn-based combat game. But if I want something more fast-paced, more keeps me on the edge of my toes, keep me on the edge of my seat, and more immersive in that sense, I definitely want to play something like an action-based combat game. So again, it just comes really down to what I'm in the mood for. I don't really prefer or sway to either or. I think both of them have their own, they're great aspects and not so great aspects to them. So comment down below, which do you prefer? Do you prefer action-based combat or do you prefer turn-based combat? Or if you're one of those people who are neutral and don't really have much of a preference. Again, if you guys enjoyed this video, do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I can't wait to see you guys on the next one. Bye.